Hello, so today we're looking at register. That's the question of how formal or informal the language is. Academic writing is pretty formal. It's not the most formal language, but it's certainly not informal. I've put a document on StudIP. This document has 5 texts. Each text is actually a collection of 7 sentences, numbered from 1 to 7. What you'll find is that for text 1, sentence 1, whatever we have with that will be repeated in text 2, sentence 1, text 3, sentence 1, and so on. And so sentence 1 in each of the 5 texts is parallel. Sentence 2 in each of the 5 texts has the same issue going on, or whatever. Or does it? Because you have 7 sentences 5 times basically. I can tell you that there are 5 issues here relating to lexis or vocabulary. And so there are 2 sentences in each text which do not have any problems, and there are 5 sentences in each text which do have a problem. Have a look at the sentences now and work out which are the 2 sentences which are perfect. The sentences without any problems are numbers 3 and 6. Did you get them? I hope so. That means that there are 5 issues, 5 types of mistakes or areas for us to consider. So now I want you to look at sentence number 1 for each of the texts. Find out what they all have in common, and in a moment we'll look at the answer. And that will be in 3, 2... You haven't checked yet, have you? Okay. Pause the video, and then we're going to look at the answers for number 1. What's the issue going on there? In 3, 2, 1. The issue here is non-scientific language. You can see bullet point number 1, I've written idioms and sayings and proverbs as well. And that's what we have in sentence number 1 in each of these texts. So we have every cloud has a silver lining, where there's a will there's a way, a rolling stone gathers no moss, subjects decided to strike while the iron was hot, and a bird in hand is worth 2 in the bush. So you wouldn't use this kind of language. I remember years ago when I was working at the University of Augsburg, one of my colleagues was marking a piece of writing written by someone from a different university, and this was a student who had an incredible understanding of proverbs and idioms and so on in English, and this student had used them in practically every sentence, and it was so very, very wrong. These expressions don't have a place in academic writing, nor do slang expressions, nor does flowery descriptive vocabulary. That's great in more artistic writing, but not for academic writing. You also need to be very precise. So you want to avoid group noun phrases, such as, I can't see on my screen what it says here, such as things and stuff and so on, and aspects as well. I'll come back to that in another class. However, you can say objects and issues. Those are still quite vague, but they can be acceptable. Okay, I now want you to pause while you work out what is wrong with sentence number 2 in each text. And we will talk about that in 3, 2, 1. Clippings. Now, I believe that you actually cover these on your Introduction to Linguistics course. So that's good, it means I don't have to explain them in too much detail. Basically, these are some words where in normal speech, we commonly use a shortened version. We clip part of the word. So the examples that we have here in sentence 2, they were photo, ad, paper, so a tabloid paper, lab, and advert. Notice I've put these clippings into 3 different categories. Can you see why? Yeah, so in the first category, advert or ad for a small ad in a newspaper, photo, lab, exam, pub. Here we've only got the first part of the word, the rest of it has been clipped. So advertisement, or in American English, advertisement, photograph, laboratory, examination, public house. For the next 2, we've in the clipped version we've only got the middle of the word, and so we don't have the start and the end. So flu and fridge. And in the last category we've got the end of the word but not the start, so paper and phone instead of newspaper and telephone. In academic writing you need to use the long forms. I think we would accept exam instead of examination, but for all, and I think we would also accept mobile phone or cell phone if you write in American English. You don't have to write mobile telephone, that would seem too formal, too weird. But for all the others you would want the long form and not the clipped form. Okay, let's see what's going on in sentence number 3. So I'll give you a moment to work that out, and we will talk about it in 3, 2, 1. I meant sentence number 4, of course, because there's nothing wrong with number 3. Okay, let's have a look at it. The issue here is these short monosyllabic nouns, so nouns with typically with only one syllable. Quid is British English for pound, the money that we have, and bucks is dollars in American English. You wouldn't use those. The word like is a word which is best to avoid when you are introducing an example. So instead you can say such as, for example, for instance. I actually have an exercise about that, which we may or may not have time for later on in this semester. Lots and a lot of, we don't want that, so many, a number of, numerous. I have an exercise about that as well. And we want you to avoid using get and got. So you've got all these other options, and yes, I do have an exercise for that as well, but I'm just introducing the information to you now at this stage. In text 3, number 2, I accidentally used the word get. The problem there was the clipping tabloid paper, but you can see I wrote very few members of the target group get their news from a tabloid paper. So instead of saying get, you might say receive their news, or read their news, or find their news. Okay, now let's look at number 5. What's the issue there? 3, 2, 1. Contractions! And we talked about this in the last video, so I'm not going to say anything else. Okay, so nothing wrong with number 6. Let's move on finally to number 7, and we'll find out about that. 3, 2, 1. The issue with number 7 is a little more complex, and it will take a few slides to explain it. Right. Let me take you back to the year 1066. That was when William the Conqueror or from Normandy in France, invaded England and conquered England at the Battle of Hastings. Now, this example you will have probably read in a book or online, maybe numerous times. But it's interesting because before 1066, the language spoken in England was Old English and Old Norse and a mixture, but Germanic languages. And for a few hundred years after 1066, there were parallel languages. There was Old English, which became Middle English, which was spoken at first only by the Anglo-Saxons, by the poor people, whereas the people in castles, they spoke Norman French. So you can see the famous example about animals and meat. The names for the animals came from Old English. Pig, cow, sheep, calf, deer. Okay, some of these words look similar to the Germans and they are all Germanic, even pig. But of course, the meat that people ate was mainly in the castles, and so that got names from Old French. So pork, beef, mutton, veal, venison, these all come from Old French. And in English we don't have any words such as pig meat, cow meat, sheep meat, etc. That's why there's an asterisk next to those terms. So you can see that English started to develop words which came from both Old English and from Old French. And this is part of the reason why English has such a large vocabulary. We even have differences in meaning between freedom, which is Germanic, and liberty, which is from French or Latin, let's say Franco-Latin. There's a slight difference in meaning. I can never remember what it is, but if you Google it, you'll definitely find answers to that question. Okay, so that's the question about nouns. Now let's look at Germanic versus Franco-Latin verbs. This is still an issue about lexis or vocabulary, by the way. This is not about grammar. Okay, this is the question of whether we use multi-word verbs or single-word verbs. There are two different types of multi-word verb, phrasal verbs and prepositional verbs. We don't need to worry about the difference. Let's look at the left-hand column. To give up, to come in, to come into. So you come into money if someone dies. To look at, to look up to. Here we've got a verb and a preposition or a particle. This is all very Germanic. You can recognise these things from German, can't you? Aufgeben, is that right? Reinkommen, and so on. On the right we have words with the same meaning but just one word. So surrender, enter, inherit, observe, admire, or observe from below. These words are all from Franco-Latin. In real academic writing, you would typically find that the register requires you to use the single word verbs on the right hand side, the ones from Franco-Latin. Ideally, it would be great if you could do that. However, in your writing, and remember this, the main focus is clarity, that you can write clearly. If you do not feel comfortable using a fancy word from French and Latin, then use the words on the left. Okay? I remember years ago when I was teaching at the Pädagogische Hochschule Schwäbisch Gmünd, one of the professors and I once sat at a computer for an hour to work out why one of the students had handed in some work to me which made absolutely no sense. In the end, we found out what had happened. She had used Leo as a dictionary, and she'd looked up practically every word and found the very first word which looked like it came from French or Latin. And what she produced was absolute nonsense. Okay, my first point is don't use Leo, use dict.cc. D-I-C-T, dict.cc, that's much better anyway. But also remember, these are just word lists. They're not dictionaries which give you definitions, and the words are often in alphabetical order. So you always need to double check words anyway. So the issue with sentence number 7 was simply that it included these multi-word verbs which were Germanic in origin rather than the single word verbs of a Franco-Latin origin. Okay. Notice that generally in academic writing there are some multi-word verbs which are Germanic which are seen as being okay, such as go on. So we now go on to consider blah 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 instead of continue. Except remember we can't use the word we. Okay. Time for an example, I think. Upon the election of the new government, a lot of stuff had to be sorted out. Okay, so upon the election of the new government, or at the time of the election of the new government. That's all good. Okay, so what's wrong with a lot of stuff had to be sorted out? There are 3 issues here. Pause the video and think about them for a moment, and then I'll tell you what the 3 issues are. The next slide is coming up in 1, 2, 3. Now. A lot of is one of those monosyllabic slang expressions. Stuff is an informal group noun phrase, and to be sorted out, in this case it's a passive form, but that's irrelevant. That's a multi-word verb, or a phrasal verb in this case, which we would want to try to avoid if we could. So I'm going to give you a moment. I'm going to let you pause the video. I want you to work out what you could write instead of a lot of stuff had to be sorted out. Clearly I won't be able to see what you've written, and there are many options, but I will give you my version. And I'll give you that in 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1, now. Upon the election of the new government, a significant number of issues required attention. I might have used artistic license there. It might not be exactly the same as a lot of stuff had to be sorted out, but I think it's fine. Okay, so at this stage in class I would ask people to go back to sentences 3 and 6 and to make one change to those 2 sentences to make them less formal. I'll let you do that just by yourself. I don't think you need me to go through the answers for that. Okay, so next up, there's me explaining what we'll be doing over the next few weeks. Hello, me! Okay, so I hope that's been helpful, and of course you can add parts of today's class to your own personal editing list for issues with language that you think you might need to check in your work before you hand it in. Let me tell you now about the next few weeks. Next week, next Saturday the 23rd or thereabouts, I will put up a video about the overall structure of a 5-paragraph essay, and we'll be analysing a body paragraph in some detail. I will then set you some homework, which will be your first homework task, which will be to write a body paragraph answering the question that we have next week. So I'll set you that on Saturday the 23rd. You need to hand that in to me by the end of May, which means you've got a week to write it. That's up. It's not very much, just one body paragraph, about 10 sentences. I'll give you more information about how to hand that in at that time. Then the following week, which is Whitsuntide, Pfingston, we have no teaching. I will be marking the homework, and I think I have 56 people taking this course, so that's quite a lot of homework for me to mark, but I'll be doing that in that week. In the following 2 weeks, from Monday the 8th until Friday the 19th of June, I'm going to be speaking to everyone via Skype or FaceTime for up to half an hour per person. So that will be 6 people a day. I think I'll use something like SurveyMonkey to sort out who I will be speaking to and at what times, and then I'll be giving you feedback on your paragraph that you've written. No matter whether it was good or bad, I still want to speak to each person individually, and that does mean that there won't be any video on Saturday the 30th of May and Saturday the 6th of June and Saturday the 13th of June. We will have a video again on Saturday the 20th of June, and that will be about linking words. Sorry. Okay, so that's quite a lot of work for you and me, but it has to be done. Okay, so there will be another video, as I said, next week on or around Saturday the 23rd of May. It might be one day late. Okay, right, and that's an important video that's laying the foundations for what you will be writing and setting you homework. I'll see you then.